every profound spirit needs a mask. Even more, around every profound spirit, a mask is continually growing. Friedrich Nietzsche. They never see it coming. The collapse of their performance. Not when the lights are still blinding. Not when the crowd still screams their name like a hymn. Fame, after all, is a beautiful illusion. A mirror house where the most hollow learn how to sparkle. Damon Rivers was a master of that illusion. The kind of man who didn't sing music. He wore it like armor. And the crowd adored him for it. But masks have a weakness. They melt in the fire of truth. And that fire came not from a rival star, but from a silent seat in the back row. Emma, invisible to most, ordinary by every social metric, and therefore underestimated by all, was no one's idea of a threat. And that was the first mistake. Because the most dangerous person in any room is not the one performing. It's the one watching, the one listening, the one who sees through it all and remains quiet until the moment truth needs a voice. This is not a story of humiliation. It's a story of revelation, of masks falling, of illusions burning, of a predator finally seeing the beast within the prey. The spotlight is about to turn, and when it does, you'll finally understand the difference between power and presence. Chapter 1. The Seduction of Spotlight and Surface. The world Damon Rivers lived in was built of applause. Not built to withstand silence, but to drown it out. He was the perfect product, carved by marketers, dressed by stylists, trained to pause between words just long enough to suggest depth. On stage, he shimmered, but underneath, he was empty, not just spiritually, but existentially. What Nietzsche called the last man, a being who avoids suffering at all cost and lives only for surface comfort. Damon didn't want truth. He wanted affirmation. He fed on attention, but he mistook it for love, a fatal confusion. Love is earned in stillness. Attention is bought with spectacle, and spectacle was all he knew. His stage was his kingdom. The audience is obedient court. When he mocked people from his pedestal, it wasn't personal, it was sport. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that a ruler must maintain appearances while wielding power in cruel ways when needed. Damon embodied this. His cruelty was wrapped in charm. His insults, dressed as jokes. But don't be fooled. These were strategic maneuvers. Domination disguised as banter. Humiliation as theater. This is the psychology of narcissistic power. What Dr. M. Scott Peck called malignant self-love. It's not confidence. It's a hunger that can never be fed. And like all hungry kings, Damon miscalculated. Because he believed the spotlight would always be his. That no one would ever dare outshine him on his stage. That every face in the crowd would mirror back his perfection. He believed his reflection was real. But when a quiet woman refused to reflect his image, his world began to crack. Chapter 2. The Quiet Woman in the Wrong Room. Emma didn't belong. Not to the gold-trimmed chandeliers, not to the manicured sparkle of curated socialites, and definitely not to the crowd that worshipped surface over soul. But then again, perhaps she was the only one who did. She came by accident, with a ticket meant for someone else, like fate had slipped her the invitation meant for a reckoning. She wore a denim jacket, not a statement, but a comfort. And in a world obsessed with performance, comfort is rebellion. Her silence wasn't shyness, it was observation. Carl Jung wrote of the introverted intuitive, the archetype who sees the world not in what it pretends to be, but in the shadows behind the mask. That was Emma. She didn't seek to be seen. She sought to understand. And what she understood, often too clearly, was falseness. You see, when you spent years living beneath the radar, you develop a sixth sense for inauthenticity. You hear the artificial notes. You smell the manufactured sincerity. You know exactly when someone is smiling with their teeth, but not their eyes. Emma didn't walk into that venue with a plan, but something deeper stirred the moment she saw David. Not attraction, not awe, recognition, not of who he was, but of what he represented. He was everything she'd been taught to admire and had learned to distrust. A man built of charm, but void of empathy. A man whose voice filled the room, but couldn't touch the soul. She didn't know yet that she would rise. She only knew she wouldn't kneel. And that quiet defiance was the most dangerous kind. Chapter 3. The Theater of Humiliation. Every predator believes they choose their prey. Damon looked into the crowd that night not for inspiration, but for control. He didn't want connection. He wanted domination dressed as interaction. That's how narcissists feed. Not on love, but on the illusion of superiority. So when his eyes locked onto Emma, unsmiling, unimpressed, unafraid, he saw a target. Not because she was weak, but because her stillness exposed his noise. That's the most threatening kind of presence, the one that doesn't flinch. Psychologically, this is what we call narcissistic injury, when a fragile ego meets a mirror that refuses to reflect its fantasy. And when that happens, the narcissist attacks. He did what tyrants always do when confronted by calm resistance. He escalated. He tried to humiliate, cloaked in a smile, laced with sarcasm, framed as banter. But humiliation is not about truth. It's about dominance. Emma from the office, he sneered. It was supposed to be a punchline. But there's an old truth in psychology. What you mock, you often fear. Damon mocked her because she was a threat his mind couldn't comprehend. Someone who couldn't be manipulated by charm, who didn't chase approval, who stood in a room designed to shrink her, and refused to shrink. And here's the Machiavellian irony. In trying to expose her as small, Damon exposed himself. Because cruelty disguised as charisma is still cruelty. And when it fails to intimidate, its ugliness becomes visible. That moment on stage, that wasn't comedy. That was a man begging the spotlight to protect him from a truth he couldn't hide from anymore. Chapter 4. The Philosophy of Counterattack. It would have been easy to sit back down, to smile awkwardly, to laugh it off and become another forgettable victim of someone else's ego trip. That's what people like Damon count on. Submission in the name of peace. But Emma didn't yield. She stood, not out of pride, not for spectacle, but because something inside her had been forced awake. Not courage, something older, something raw. It wasn't a fight for attention. It was a fight for truth. There is a moment, a precise, sharp moment, when fear transforms into defiance. Seneca wrote, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage, but sometimes simply standing up is a declaration of war, not against the world, but against the version of yourself that always looked down." Damon, still smirking, saw it as a challenge to his throne. But he did realize he had summoned something far more dangerous than a rival singer. He had summoned someone who no longer feared being seen. And in the Machiavellian world of performance, authenticity is heresy. Because the entire system, the glamour, the hype, the illusion, is built on the fear of being ordinary. But Emma, in that moment, weaponized her ordinariness, her denim jacket, her office job, her forgotten dreams. Robert Greene wrote in the 48 Laws of Power, "Do not outshine the master."